So I came across this story recently about a couple of kids who showed up in a small village in Suffolk, England, little village is called Woolpit. So a couple of kids under age 10, a boy and a girl, show up one day. The villagers were out working on building their wolf pits, which are basically like trenches that you would use to trap wolves, right? You have wolves coming into the area, they're trying to eat your cattle, they're attacking you, whatever. So you want to build these defenses. That's basically what they would do. They would go out and work on these little defenses. And so the villagers are out working on their wolf pits, and they come across these kids, boy and girl, say they're between 6 and 8 years old. They have no idea where they're from. They don't speak English. They don't recognize the language they're speaking. And they're wearing these, odd clothing they don't recognize. And the most important and weirdest thing of all is they have green skin, right? So villagers take them in, they try to feed them, they're trying to figure out, where they're from, what's going on with them, they try to take care of them. You can't make heads or tails of it, right? This is an old story that's been kind of passed down from generations. In them, different types of food, meat, potatoes, fruit, whatever they can think of that, would help the kids kind of get their strength back and then kind of calm them down a little bit. It's not until they, for whatever reason, at some point they eat raw green beans, and the kids just go to town on them, right? They're eating these for days. That's all they want to eat. That's the only thing they can tolerate. So eventually the boy passes away not too long after they arrive, and the girl ends up growing up and does end up getting married and starts learning English, and then she starts telling her story, right? She says she's from St. Martin's Land, and she says there everybody has green skin. There's no sunlight there, and there's this huge river that separates where they're at from this more well-lit land sort of in the distance that they know of, area with outside of where the wolf pits are, where their building is. So what are the explanations for this story? What exactly happened with these kids? How'd they end up there? Why is their skin green? Why does anybody understand their language, right? Well, I have a couple theories. I think we're going to go over what the common ones are, and then I'll kind of get into my personal thoughts on it. First of all, this could have just been like a medieval allegory, some kind of story that was made up, obviously, about kids showing up out of nowhere. Maybe they're like leprechauns or something, or aliens. Well, one theory is that they're Flemish refugees, that they've showed up and that they speak the Flemish language, and that's why nobody understands them, and they look a little different. And maybe they were malnourished coming from that, or traveling a far distance, and kind of change the color of their skin tone, and that's why nobody recognized what was going on with them. And maybe the skin tone was exaggerated. Some of the weirder theories, but right up my alley of what we want to get into is going to be maybe they're from an underground civilization, which would explain no sunlight, right? Maybe there is an extraterrestrial dimension to it, or they green skin, right? Green aliens, Martians, something along those lines. Another theory would be interdimensional, right? Which would explain they don't really know where they're from, they can't explain it, and so maybe in her ability to assimilate and kind of live a normal life going forward. I don't think she'd be that similar to everybody around her if she was from another dimension. So we're not going to really get into the weeds with that. I think there's a pretty simple explanation here that explains 70-80% of the story. There is a disease called chlorosis, right? And this has been known for a long time. It wasn't really effectively treated until we got to the 18th and 19th century. But there was a Greek doctor who diagnosed it. Chloros actually in Greek means green, right? So that's the number one telltale symptom of it. Very common in malnourished children, especially girls. for centuries until they started coming up with medications and antibiotics for it. Kind of want to go, so let's go over a case where a Chinese man back in 2013 was actually diagnosed with it, with a weird case of green skin, right? He came into the hospital, he was weak, malnourished, green skin, and sick. He was eating snails from a local riverbed where he lived. He was going down every night, capturing them, eating them by the pound. And what does this have to do with chlorosis? Well, these snails contain something called a liver fluke, which is a type of parasite that does infect the liver of the host and causes symptoms like fatigue, dizziness, and of course, skin going green. So how does this tie into our story about these two children in Woolpit? Well, the girl's story, they mentioned that they were herding cattle before they disappeared and ended up in Woolpit. And another place that snails like to hang out is going to be cattle pasture or sheep pastures, right? And they like to infect mammalian hosts, and so people who live in those kind of areas and interfere and are eating off the land there are going to run into it. They also mentioned that there's a big river where they're from, so maybe they were eating snails out of the river, and the same thing that happened to this kid is what happened, this Chinese guy in 2013 is what happened to them, right? He was eating so many that his skin turned. Maybe they were eating so many that their skin turned. As far as how they ended up in Woolpit and from a different, speaking a different language, wearing different clothes, well, we're talking 12th century England, 1100s. People were probably coming in from all over the place at, different cultures, and, they would come into this small village. Nobody's educated. Nobody's really traveled far. They know what's around them and not much else. I'm pretty sure people could come in from many different areas where they're not going to know their language, not going to recognize the clothes they're wearing, and their origins are going to be a mystery. It's going to be a while before they figure out who they are and where they're from. The fact that it was two children alone, maybe their parents abandoned them, maybe they were part of like some kind of caravan or refugee group that was fleeing some area that was invaded or whatnot, or maybe had a disease that ran through, and they just stumbled upon this village. And obviously in a poor health state, they're very delirious. More importantly, they're kids, they're little kids, so they have big imaginations, right? It's a trauma event, having to deal with not being fed well, so she's starving, they're traveling a long period of time, they're fleeing some, traumatic event that caused them to leave their homeland and lose track of their parents, so she makes up stories just to kind of help her mind kind of process what's happening, and blocks out all the negative, the bad things that they were experiencing. Her brother dies, right? I mean, the girl lost her whole family, had to start a whole new life. I mean, she's going to make anything up just to kind of mentally process it and get her bearings on everything, in my opinion. I think that's a pretty simple explanation, and I think this mystery can be put to bed. If anybody else has any other theories or doesn't think this kind of adds up, let me know in the comments and we'll discuss it, but I'd say this one's pretty self-explanatory.